Hey everybody, OperationZ here, and we're continuing with the story of Abraham, part 16. And we're continuing where we left off in part 15, where the these men come to Abraham, and it turns out to be God. And when it's God, that we also see on top of that the promises that God has for Abraham and Sarah, and we see just that all these things that he sits and under the tree with Abraham, and they have a meal together, and he just talks about their future plans and all these things. And we're going to continue now. Genesis chapter 18, verse 16. And the men rose up from thence and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. So they looked towards Sodom, and we're about to see what takes place concerning Sodom and Gomorrah when they set their gaze upon it, and Abraham takes them to go along the way on this journey, and he's just there, talking with God, to show them about the way, and so on, which of course they know where it's at. They know exactly where it's at, especially God being God, knowing everything. But he's just kind of there with him, as it says here in the scriptures. So Genesis chapter 18, verse 17, and the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? So God's about to reveal to Abraham something that he's about to do concerning Sodom and also Gomorrah. And we're going to see what that is here in the next verse, but it's obviously something, because it wasn't just to come and see Abraham, who was near Sodom and Gomorrah, but it was also God came down for the purpose of something to do with Sodom and Gomorrah, as we're about to see here. So Genesis 18, verse 18, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. So it's continuing his question from 17. He's basically saying, should I keep this from Abraham, or should I tell him? And of course he decides to tell him. So Genesis chapter 18, verse 19, for I know him that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. So it's just amazing to see how highly God speaks about Abraham, that he knows Abraham's heart and the type of man that Abraham is, that he's saying, surely he will guide his household and his affairs with his household with good and with justice and judgment, and he will be all these ways, because he's saying, I have seen Abraham and his actions and his deeds and his obedience to him, the Most High God, that we see here. God highly favors Abraham, and he sees his righteousness, his courage, his willingness to be obedient and obey God before he even knew he was the Most High God, that he just knew that a voice came to him and told him to leave his homeland, and he was just obedient onto the voice that he did. And then he finds out that it's the Most High God through, the king of Salem, the king and high priest of the Most High God, that, he's there and sees all these things, and all these things take place. He is noting Abraham as a very righteous and good person in the Lord's eyes, just because of his faithfulness, his courage, his obedience, and everything that he did, just that he listened to God, and he was a willing vessel to do what the Lord had for him to do. And he made all these big sacrifices, leaving his homeland and that security of just feeling certain and knowing where he's at there with his father and his brethren and all that, to follow this voice that he just starts to hear, that it turns out to be the Most High God. And we just see that he's completely obedient to him, and God again highly favors Abraham, and he chooses him for his purposes. And he's saying, should I keep this, what I'm about to do concerning Sodom and Gomorrah, from Abraham my servant, who's listened to me and obeyed me and has entered into this covenant with me to be his God and for him to be my people and the start of his people? And we see that. And let's continue to the next verse. After he speaks, good words concerning Abraham, Genesis chapter 18, verse 20 says this: "And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous." So, I've talked briefly about Sodom and Gomorrah, but the thing about Sodom and Gomorrah is that it was not one only sin that it's not just one kind of thing. It was a very corrupt, vile, and just putrid city, Sodom and Gomorrah both, that it was just as a great cry that came up to God, so much so that he had to come down to it and see murders in the streets, rebellion, and all these types of things to any form of law that would be, thieves, robbery, stealing, just things like that. And it was very vile, rapes, and just anything that people wanted to do that they would set their mind to do was primarily for evil purposes and vile purposes. And it was just a very corrupt and harmful city. Like, to anybody that would even come near the city, it's bad, and we just see all these things that take place. Abraham being right there, and he gets caught in the middle with that battle between the rebelling kings and with the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and all those other kings that were with them. And he gathers up his men and teams up with his allies, the Amorites, to go and save Lot. Just getting caught in the middle of all this stuff, which that had nothing to do with the corruption of the city, but just all these things that are taking place there. And the city that is mentioned, both cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, were very corrupt and vile before the Lord. And it says, as a great cry came up to it, God saw how vile the city was, both cities, so much so that he comes down just to see it. And again, he also comes down there to visit his servant and his friend, Abraham. But his true purposes, he did that, but he was also coming on a personal mission, the Lord and Creator, the Lord of hosts, coming down to just visit these cities, and before he destroys everything in it and all these things that are going to take place, whatever does, because we're not there yet, but we're going to get there. So Genesis chapter 18 verse 21, "And I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come on to me, and if not, I will know." So it says, if not, I will know. But at the same time, with this being God we're talking about, we can actually see little bits of God's compassion and mercy and his desire to not destroy it. Because God's all-knowing, like, he knew how it was, but because of his compassion and mercy towards not really wanting to do that, he came down and, from his kingdom, and he came just to visit it and to see. And he sent the the two that were with him, they went to go and look and see what was taking place and what was going on with this, like what is going on with it and so on and so forth here. And when we continue here, like I said, God's all knowing. He already knows what's going on. He just wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt in the best possible way. So Genesis chapter 18, verse 22, and the men turned their faces from thence and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord. So Abraham stands before the Lord, and we're going to see here with what's to come what Abraham does. We're going to see his just demeanor and more of his character. There's going to be some good traits of his character that, we see why God, the creator and the master of the whole universe, picked just this one person here to be his number one patriarch for the genesis of his people. That we see here that, his character will be evidently displayed here in part 17 coming next, but it's just an incredible feat to see his demeanor and his nature and just the way that he is. And, what he's about to do would actually be a scary thing to do, but he does it out of his care for these people that he doesn't even know, for these people that, he sticks his neck out for these people that are doing all this bad stuff that he doesn't even know. And we're going to see a lot of stuff about his character here in part 17. But that's the message for today, and you all have a blessed day.